The scream that tore from Eleanor Hartwell's throat echoed off the Red Canyon walls like a death knell, and in that frozen moment she knew her 22 years of life were about to end in the most terrifying way possible. It was April 1878, and Eleanor had been foolish enough to wander away from her family's wagon camp just outside of Prescott, Arizona territory. She had been collecting wildflowers along the canyon rim, enchanted by the spring blooms that dotted the rust-colored landscape. The afternoon sun had been warm on her shoulders, and she had lost track of time and distance, mesmerized by the purple lupines and golden poppies that seemed to grow more abundantly the further she walked. When she realized how far she had strayed, panic set in, and she had tried to find a shortcut back through a narrow canyon passage. That was when she saw it. The mountain lion stood on a boulder 15 feet ahead, its tawny coat blending perfectly with the sandstone surroundings. The creature was massive, easily weighing over 150 pounds, with shoulders bunched with muscle and eyes that fixed on her with predatory intelligence. Eleanor's basket of flowers tumbled from her hands, scattering purple and gold across the dusty ground. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew that was the worst thing she could do. The canyon walls rose steep and unforgiving on either side, trapping her in a natural corridor with nowhere to go. The mountain lion crouched lower, its tail twitching with deadly intent. Eleanor's back hit solid rock. She had reached the end of the passage, a dead end where the canyon walls converged. The cougar began to advance, moving with the fluid grace of a born killer. Its lips pulled back, revealing fangs that could crush bone. Eleanor pressed herself against the stone, her fingers scraping uselessly at the rough surface as if she could somehow melt into it and disappear. The mountain lion gathered itself to spring. The rifle shot cracked through the canyon like thunder from a clear sky. The bullet struck the rock face inches from the cougar's head, sending chips of stone flying. The massive cat yowled and twisted in midair, abandoning its attack to scramble up the canyon wall with shocking speed. Another shot rang out, deliberately aimed high, and the mountain lion disappeared over the rim in a flash of tawny fur. Eleanor's legs gave out, and she slid down the rock wall, gasping for air that would not seem to fill her lungs. Her entire body shook so violently she could not control it. Through blurred vision, she saw a figure running toward her, a rifle held expertly in strong hands. The cowboy who had saved her life dropped to one knee beside her, setting his rifle carefully aside. He had the kind of face that spoke of long days under the desert sun, weathered but handsome, with concerned brown eyes that searched her features for signs of injury. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a 3-day beard shadowing his jaw. "Are you hurt? Did it touch you?" His voice was deep and urgent, his hands hovering near her shoulders, as if he wanted to check her for wounds but did not dare presume to touch her. Eleanor tried to speak, but only a sob came out. She shook her head frantically, unable to form words. "It's all right now. You're safe. The cat is gone, and it won't be coming back." His voice gentled, taking on a soothing quality that somehow penetrated the fog of terror that gripped her. "Just breathe, nice and slow. You're safe now." Eleanor focused on his voice, using it as an anchor to pull herself back from the edge of hysteria. She drew in a shuddering breath, then another. Gradually, her vision cleared, and the trembling began to subside to manageable levels. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "You saved my life." "Lucky I was tracking that cat. Been following its prints for the better part of 2 hours." He sat back on his heels, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. "Name's Jesse Morrison. I work cattle for the Double Bar Ranch about 10 miles east of here." "Eleanor Hartwell." She wiped at her eyes with shaking hands, embarrassed by her tears but unable to stop them. "My family is camped near Prescott. I wandered too far and got lost." Jesse nodded, his expression understanding rather than judgmental. These canyons can turn a person around faster than a rattlesnake strike. How long have you been out here? I don't know. An hour, maybe? Eleanor looked up at the sky, trying to gauge the sun's position. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving her feeling hollowed out and exhausted. We need to get you back before dark. These lands are not safe for wandering, especially alone. Jesse stood and extended his hand to her. Cole, can you walk? Eleanor placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. When she swayed slightly, his other hand came to her elbow, steadying her with easy strength. I think so. She tested her legs and found them wobbly but functional. I must have dropped my basket somewhere. Flowers are not worth your life, Miss Hartwell. Come on, my horse is just up the canyon a ways. Jesse kept his hand under her elbow as they began to walk, and Eleanor found herself grateful for the support. Her legs felt like water, and the full impact of how close she had come to dying was settling over her like a heavy blanket. Jesse's horse was a sturdy buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. The animal barely flicked an ear when Jesse helped Eleanor mount, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and Eleanor found the circle of his embrace unexpectedly comforting. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, smell the clean scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes. Which direction is your camp? Jesse asked, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. Eleanor tried to orient herself, but everything looked different from horseback, and her panicked flight through the canyons had completely disoriented her. I'm sorry, I don't know. I came from the north, I think, but I took so many turns. No matter. I will take you into Prescott proper. Someone there will know your family. Jesse guided the horse with subtle shifts of his weight, following a trail that Eleanor would never have seen on her own. The buckskin picked its way carefully through the rocky terrain, and Jesse kept up a steady stream of quiet conversation that helped distract Eleanor from replaying her near-death experience. He told her about tracking the mountain lion, how it had killed 2 calves from the double-bar herd over the past week. The ranch owner had sent Jesse to deal with the problem, but after seeing the magnificent cat up close, Jesse found himself hoping it would simply move on to wilder territories rather than forcing him to kill it. Eleanor listened to his deep voice and felt the tension slowly draining from her body. There was something inherently trustworthy about Jesse Morrison, something steady and genuine, that made her feel safe in a way that went beyond the obvious fact that he carried a rifle and knew how to use it. They emerged from the canyon system as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Prescott lay spread before them, a collection of wooden buildings and tents that represented the growing civilization pushing into the Arizona territory. Eleanor recognized the distinctive shape of Granite Creek winding through the landscape and felt a wash of relief. My family's camp is on the south side near the big cottonwood grove, she said, pointing. Jesse guided the buckskin in that direction, and within 20 minutes they rode into a camp where 3 wagons sat circled around a fire pit. A woman in a faded calico dress looked up from the pot she was stirring, and her face went white. Eleanor. Oh my God, Eleanor. Martha Hartwell dropped her spoon and ran toward them, her skirts clutched in her hands. We have been searching everywhere. Your father and brothers are out looking. We thought... She broke off as Jesse dismounted and helped Eleanor down. Martha grabbed her daughter and held her tight, and Eleanor felt fresh tears spring to her eyes at the familiar comfort of her mother's embrace. I'm all right, Mama. I'm safe. Eleanor clung to her mother for a long moment before pulling back. This is Jesse Morrison. He saved my life. There was a mountain lion and I was trapped, and he shot his rifle and scared it away. Martha turned to Jesse with eyes full of tears and gratitude. How can we ever thank you? If something had happened to Eleanor. Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. No thanks needed, ma'am. I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time. Jesse shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, with the emotional display. Your daughter was very brave. Many people would have panicked and run, which would have triggered the cat's hunting instinct. She stayed still and kept her head. Eleanor felt a flush of warmth at the compliment, though she knew the truth was that she had been too terrified to move. Before she could say anything, the sound of galloping horses announced the return of her father and brothers. Thomas Hartwell was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with gray streaking his beard. He pulled his horse to a sliding stop and vaulted from the saddle with surprising agility. "Eleanor, thank the Lord!" He strode forward and pulled his daughter into a crushing hug that drove the air from her lungs. "Where were you? What happened?" The story had to be told again, with Eleanor's two younger brothers, Patrick and Henry, listening with wide eyes and making appropriately impressed sounds when they heard about the mountain lion. Thomas Hartwell insisted that Jesse stay for supper, refusing to take no for an answer, and Jesse finally agreed with a shy smile that made Eleanor's heart do a strange little flip in her chest. Over a meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork, Eleanor learned more about the cowboy who had saved her life. Jesse was 26 years old, originally from Texas, and had been working cattle in the Arizona Territory for the past 3 years. He was soft-spoken and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once he became comfortable with the family. He clearly knew the land intimately, speaking knowledgeably about the plants and animals, the water sources and weather patterns that governed life in this harsh but beautiful country. Eleanor found herself watching him as he talked with her father and brothers, noticing the way firelight played across his features, the easy competence in every movement. Several times she caught him glancing in her direction, and when their eyes met, he would offer a small smile that made her feel warm all over. The Hartwell family was traveling from Missouri to California, seeking better opportunities in the growing communities along the coast. They had stopped in Prescott to rest the animals and replenish supplies before tackling the difficult journey west through the Mojave Desert. Thomas had been considering staying in Arizona Territory instead, attracted by the mining opportunities and available ranch land, but had not yet made a final decision. As the evening wore on and the fire burned down to glowing coals, Jesse finally rose to leave. "I should get back. Long ride to the Double Bar, and I need to report to Mr. Henderson about the mountain lion." Eleanor stood as well, hugging her shawl around her shoulders against the cooling night air. "Will you tell him you did not kill it? Will you get in trouble?" Jesse smiled. "I will tell him I tracked it and fired warning shots that drove it north into the high country. That cat was hunting because the elk herds are still up in the mountains. Once they come down for summer, it will have easier prey than cattle. Mr. Henderson is a reasonable man. He will understand." Thomas Hartwell shook Jesse's hand with both of his own. "You have our deepest gratitude, son. If you are ever in need of anything, you need only ask." "I appreciate that, sir." Jesse turned to Eleanor and touched the brim of his hat. "You take care, Miss Hartwell. Stay close to camp from now on." "I will," Eleanor promised. On impulse, she stepped forward and caught his hand. "Thank you again, Jesse. I owe you everything." For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, and something passed between them that made Eleanor's breath catch. Jesse's eyes held hers, and in the firelight she could see emotions flickering across his face that matched the sudden longing stirring in her own heart. Then he squeezed her hand gently and released it, stepping back. "Goodbye, Eleanor." She watched him mount the buckskin and ride away into the darkness, and a strange ache settled in her chest. It made no sense. She had only just met the man, had spent perhaps 3 hours in his company total. Yet the thought of never seeing him again felt wrong in a way she could not explain. That night, Eleanor lay in her bedroll under the wagon and stared up at the stars visible between the wheel spokes. She replayed every moment of the day, from the terror of facing the mountain lion to the feeling of safety in Jesse's arms as they rode his horse. She thought about his kind eyes and gentle voice, the way he had comforted her without making her feel weak or foolish. Sleep was a long time coming. The next morning, Eleanor helped her mother with the washing, scrubbing their travel-stained clothes in the cold water of Granite Creek. Her mind kept wandering back to Jesse Morrison, and she found herself scanning the landscape as if he might appear on the horizon. "You are very quiet this morning," Martha observed, wringing out a shirt with strong, practiced hands. "Are you still shaken from yesterday?" "A little," Eleanor admitted. It was not entirely a lie. "Mama, how long are we staying in Prescott?" "Your father's meeting with some men this afternoon to discuss business opportunities in the area. He is seriously considering settling here rather than pushing on to California." Martha glanced at her daughter with knowing eyes. "Why do you ask?" Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Just curious. It seems like a nice town." Martha smiled but said nothing more, and Eleanor was grateful for her mother's discretion. Still, she could not shake the hope that took root in her heart at the news that they might be staying. If her father decided to settle in Prescott, there would be opportunities to see Jesse again. The thought made her pulse quicken. 3 days passed. Eleanor helped with camp chores and accompanied her mother into town to purchase supplies. Prescott was a lively place full of miners, ranchers, and merchants, all trying to make their fortunes on the frontier. Eleanor found herself studying every cowboy they passed, her heart leaping whenever she saw a tall figure in a dark hat, only to sink again when it proved to be a stranger. On the 4th morning, Eleanor woke to find her father in animated conversation with her brothers beside the fire. She emerged from under the wagon, smoothing her skirts and tucking loose hair behind her ears. "What is happening?" Thomas turned to her with a broad smile. "I have made a decision. We are staying in the Arizona Territory. I have secured a position managing a general store here in Prescott with an option to buy into partnership after a year. We will build a proper house before winter comes." Eleanor's heart soared. "That's wonderful, Papa." She hugged her father tightly, and the happiness on his face made her own joy feel less selfish. This was good news for the whole family, not just for her foolish hope of seeing a certain cowboy again. The Hartwells moved into a small house in town while Thomas began his work at the general store. Martha took in sewing to supplement their income, and Patrick and Henry found work at the livery stable. Eleanor helped at the store 3 days a week, learning the business and interacting with the steady stream of customers who came through. 2 weeks passed without any sign of Jesse Morrison. Eleanor tried not to let disappointment consume her, reminding herself that he worked at a ranch 10 miles away and had no reason to come into town. Still, every time the bell above the store door chimed, she looked up with a hopeful flutter in her chest. It was a Thursday afternoon in early May when Jesse finally walked through the door of Hartwell General Store. Eleanor was standing on a ladder stocking bolts of fabric on high shelves when she heard the familiar jingle of the bell. She glanced down automatically and nearly fell off the ladder when she saw who it was. Jesse caught sight of her at the same moment, and his weathered face broke into a smile that transformed it completely. "Miss Hartwell, I heard your family was staying in Prescott, but I did not dare hope I would run into you so soon." Eleanor climbed down the ladder with as much dignity as she could manage, aware that her heart was racing and her palms had gone damp. "Mr. Morrison, what a pleasant surprise." She smoothed her apron and tried to appear calm. "What brings you to town?" "Supply run for the ranch. We need 100 pounds of flour, 50 of sugar, and various other items." Jesse pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket and held it out. "Mr. Henderson sent me with a list." Eleanor took the list, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. That small contact sent a tingle up her arm that was entirely inappropriate and absolutely thrilling. "Of course. I will gather these items for you. It may take a little while. I am in no hurry." Jesse leaned against the counter, his eyes following her as she moved around the store. "How are you settling in? Any more encounters with mountain lions?" Eleanor laughed, the sound coming out a bit breathless. "No, thankfully. I have learned my lesson about wandering off alone. How is the ranch? Did the mountain lion move on?" "It did. No more missing calves, and I found tracks heading north into higher elevations just as I hoped." Jesse watched her measure out flour into a canvas sack. "I have thought about you often, wondering if you were all right after such a scare." The admission sent a warm glow through Eleanor's entire body. "I have thought about you as well," she said softly. then felt her cheeks flame at her boldness. But when she glanced at Jesse, he was smiling. "Have you now?" There was a gentle teasing quality to his voice, but also something deeper, something that made Eleanor's mouth go dry. "You did save my life. It would be strange if I did not think about that." She tried to sound practical, but feared she was failing miserably. They fell into easy conversation as Eleanor gathered the supplies on Jesse's list. He told her about life on the double bar, the long days of riding fence lines and working cattle, the beauty of the high country where the ranch grazed its herds in summer. Eleanor told him about the store, about her family's plans to build a house on a lot her father had purchased on the east side of town. The minutes slipped past like water, and Eleanor found herself wishing the supply list was 3 times as long. When all the items were gathered and loaded into Jesse's wagon outside, there was nothing left to prolong his visit. He paid for the supplies, and Eleanor carefully counted out his change, acutely aware that this might be the last time she saw him for weeks or even months. "Miss Hartwell? Eleanor, if I may be so bold?" Jesse cleared his throat, suddenly looking nervous in a way he had not when facing down a mountain lion. "Would you allow me to call on you? Properly, I mean. To court you, if your father approves?" Eleanor felt as if the sun had suddenly come out from behind clouds. "I would like that very much," she said, not caring that her voice shook with emotion. "My father would need to give his permission, of course, but I think he will. He speaks very highly of you." Jesse's face lit up with relief and joy. "Then I will come by your home this Sunday afternoon if that suits. I would like to speak with your father formally." Sunday would be perfect. Eleanor clasped her hands together to keep from reaching out to touch him, knowing such behavior would be entirely improper in the middle of her father's store. Jesse touched his hat brim, his eyes warm. "Until Sunday, then. Goodbye, Eleanor." "Goodbye, Jesse." Eleanor watched through the store window as he climbed onto the wagon seat and gathered the reins. He looked back once, caught her watching, and smiled before driving away down the dusty street. Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammering beneath her palm. "That was the cowboy who saved you, was it not?" Thomas Hartwell emerged from the storeroom, his arms full of canned goods. "Jesse Morrison?" "Yes, Papa." Eleanor turned to face her father, trying to read his expression. "He asked permission to call on me, to court me properly. He said he would come by the house on Sunday to speak with you." Thomas set down the canned goods and studied his daughter's face. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "He seems like a good man, hardworking, respectful, and he did save your life. I will hear what he has to say." Eleanor hugged her father tightly. "Thank you, Papa." Sunday arrived with agonizing slowness. Eleanor changed her dress 3 times, trying to decide between the blue calico, the green cotton, and the yellow muslin. She finally settled on the blue, which Martha said brought out her eyes. She braided her honey-brown hair and pinned it up, allowing a few soft tendrils to frame her face. Jesse arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, riding the same buckskin gelding and looking uncomfortable in a clean white shirt and string tie. He had shaved and tamed his dark hair, though one stubborn lock still fell across his forehead. Eleanor thought he looked wonderful. Thomas invited Jesse into their modest home, and the 2 men disappeared into the small parlor area for a private conversation that seemed to last an eternity. Eleanor paced the kitchen while Martha calmly prepared coffee and sliced a dried apple cake she had made that morning. "Stop fidgeting," Martha said mildly. "Your father likes him. Everything will be fine." "How can you be so calm?" Eleanor paused in her pacing to stare at her mother. Martha smiled. "Because I recognize the way you look at that young man. It is the same way I looked at your father when I was your age. Some things are simply meant to be." When Thomas finally emerged from the parlor with Jesse, both men were smiling. "Eleanor, Mr. Morrison has asked permission to court you, and I have agreed," Thomas announced. "You will observe proper behavior at all times, and you will not be alone together without a chaperone present. Is that understood?" "Yes, Papa, of course." Eleanor could not keep the joy from her voice. Jesse looked relieved and happy. "Thank you, sir. I will treat your daughter with the utmost respect." What followed was one of the most wonderful afternoons of Eleanor's life. With Martha and Patrick serving as chaperones, Jesse and Eleanor took a walk through town and out to a small hill overlooking the valley. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions and laughing at each other's stories. Jesse had a quiet intelligence and a thoughtful way of looking at the world that Eleanor found deeply appealing. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, and asked questions that showed genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, they sat on a large flat rock while Patrick threw stones at a distant tree, giving them the illusion of privacy. "I knew the moment I saw you pressed against that canyon wall that you were going to change my life," Jesse said quietly. "I know that probably sounds foolish, given the circumstances." "It does not sound foolish at all." Eleanor turned to look at him, her heart full to bursting. "I felt the same way, like fate had brought us together." Jesse reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. His touch was warm and gentle, his thumb stroking softly across her knuckles. "I have not got much to offer you right now. I am just a ranch hand with some savings and a good horse, but I am hard-working and I will provide for you. In time, I hope to have my own spread, my own cattle. I will build you a good life, Eleanor. I swear it." "I do not need grand promises," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "I just need you." The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Eleanor's life. Jesse made the 10-mile ride into Prescott every Sunday, and often one evening during the week as well. They took chaperoned walks, attended church socials and town dances, and spent hours talking about their hopes and dreams. Jesse was a man of action rather than flowery words, but everything he did showed Eleanor how deeply he cared for her. He brought her wildflowers that he picked from the high meadows, taught her to identify bird calls and animal tracks, and listened with genuine interest when she talked about books she had read or her dreams of one day having children of her own. Thomas and Martha welcomed Jesse into their family with open arms. He helped Thomas with heavy work around the property, played checkers with Patrick and Henry, and charmed Martha with his polite manners and obvious devotion to Eleanor. By the time summer arrived in full force, turning the Arizona landscape into a furnace of heat and dust, everyone simply assumed that Jesse and Eleanor would marry. It was on a Sunday evening in late June that Jesse asked Eleanor to be his wife. They were sitting on the porch of the Hartwell house, ostensibly under Martha's watchful eye, though she had tactfully positioned herself in the kitchen where she could hear but not see them. The heat of the day was finally beginning to break, and a slight breeze stirred the dust in the street. Jesse had been quiet all afternoon, clearly working up his nerve for something. When he finally turned to Eleanor and took both her hands in his expression was so serious and full of love that she felt tears prick her eyes. "Eleanor Hartwell, I love you with everything I am," Jesse said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy if you will have me. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Eleanor breathed, the word escaping on a sob of pure joy. "Yes, Jesse, I will marry you. I love you so much." Jesse pulled a small ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a tiny chip of turquoise set in the center. "It is not much, but the turquoise comes from the Arizona territory. I wanted you to have something that represents where we found each other." "It is perfect." Eleanor held out her left hand, trembling, and Jesse slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. Then Jesse leaned forward, slowly and carefully, giving her time to turn away if she wished. Eleanor closed her eyes and felt the soft press of his lips against hers, a kiss so tender and full of promise that it seemed to stop time itself. When they parted, both were breathing hard, and Jesse rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to make you so happy," he whispered. "You already do," Eleanor replied. They were married on a golden September afternoon with the worst of the summer heat finally broken and the first hints of autumn crisp in the air. The wedding took place in Prescott's small church, with half the town in attendance. Eleanor wore a dress of ivory linen that Martha had sewn with loving care, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Jesse had ridden into the high country to collect. When Jesse turned to watch her walk down the aisle on her father's arm, the look on his face made Eleanor's heart soar. His eyes shone with unshed tears, and his expression held such love and devotion that she knew without any doubt that she was making the right choice. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jesse kissed her with a passion that made several of the older ladies titter behind their fans, but Eleanor did not care. She was married to the man she loved, and nothing else mattered. The reception was held in the yard behind the church, with tables laden with food contributed by friends and neighbors. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts, and Eleanor felt like she was floating through a beautiful dream. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Jesse pulled Eleanor aside. "I have a surprise for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief and excitement. "Come with me." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her just as he had on that first day when he had saved her life. The familiarity of his arms around her made Eleanor smile. They rode out of town as the stars began to appear, and Eleanor leaned back against her husband's chest, feeling utterly content. 20 minutes later, Jesse guided the buckskin off the main road and up a gentle slope. At the top stood a small cabin, rough-hewn but sturdy, with smoke curling from the chimney and warm light glowing from the windows. "What is this?" Eleanor asked, her voice full of wonder. "Our home," Jesse said simply. "I have been building it for the past 3 months, using every spare moment I had. I wanted to have it ready for when you became my wife. It is not much yet, just 2 rooms and a loft, but we can add on as we need to. The land is ours, bought and paid for, 160 acres under the Homestead Act." Eleanor twisted in the saddle to stare at him, tears streaming down her face. "You built us a house? Jesse, I cannot believe you did this." "I told you I would provide for you." Jesse brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. "I saved every penny I earned, and your father helped me with the legal paperwork. I left the double bar last week. From now on, we build our own ranch, our own future." He dismounted and lifted Eleanor down, then swept her up into his arms. "I am supposed to carry you over the threshold," he explained with a grin, and Eleanor laughed through her tears as he carried her into their new home. The cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs that Jesse had built himself, and a large bed covered with a quilt that Martha had made as a wedding gift. Someone, probably Patrick and Henry, had stocked the shelves with food and supplies, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the table. Jesse set Eleanor on her feet and turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morrison." "I love you," Eleanor said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you so much, Jesse." He kissed her then deeply and thoroughly, and Eleanor lost herself in the taste and feel of him. They had waited so long, behaving properly throughout their courtship, and now there were no more barriers between them. Jesse lifted her into his arms again and carried her to the bed, and Eleanor went willingly, her heart full of love and trust. The months that followed were filled with hard work and deep happiness. Jesse and Eleanor worked side by side to build their ranch, starting with a dozen cattle purchased with Jesse's savings and gradually growing the herd. They planted a vegetable garden, built a chicken coop, and slowly added improvements to the cabin. Eleanor discovered that she loved ranch life. She learned to ride properly, to help with the cattle, to shoot a rifle for both protection and hunting. Jesse was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, and Eleanor found satisfaction in mastering new skills. They made a good team, anticipating each other's needs and working in harmony. When winter came, they spent long evenings by the fire, with Jesse teaching Eleanor to play chess, and Eleanor reading aloud from books she borrowed from the small library in town. They talked about their plans for the ranch, dreamed about the future, and fell more deeply in love with each passing day. In the spring, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain before telling Jesse. When she finally shared the news over breakfast one morning, Jesse's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He leaped up from the table, swept her into his arms, and spun her around laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. Eleanor, you have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Eleanor found the summer heat difficult to bear in her condition. Jesse was endlessly solicitous, doing all the heavy work and insisting that Eleanor rest frequently. Martha came out to the ranch often, bringing supplies and advice, and Eleanor was grateful for her mother's steady presence. Their son was born on a cold November night in 1879 after a labor that lasted 12 hours and left Eleanor exhausted but triumphant. Jesse had paced the cabin like a caged mountain lion while Martha attended Eleanor, and when he was finally allowed to enter and meet his son, the look of awe on his face was something Eleanor would treasure forever. "He is perfect," Jesse whispered, carefully cradling the tiny bundle. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Jesse Morrison, after both grandfathers, and called him Tommy. He was a healthy, happy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. Jesse proved to be a devoted father, patient with night feedings and diaper changes, endlessly entertained by every coo and gesture their son made. The ranch continued to prosper. Jesse's reputation for honesty and hard work brought him opportunities to buy additional cattle at fair prices, and their herd grew steadily. They hired on a ranch hand named Miguel Rodriguez, a skilled horseman who became a trusted friend. With Miguel's help, Jesse was able to take on more cattle and expand their operations. When Tommy was 2 years old, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah after Jesse's mother, who had passed away when Jesse was young. Sarah had Eleanor's honey brown hair and Jesse's dark eyes, and she was a sweet, gentle child who adored her big brother. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch grew from 160 acres to over 1,000, with 300 head of cattle and a reputation for quality stock. Jesse and Miguel built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, a proper ranch house with 4 bedrooms, a big kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Eleanor became known throughout the region for her kindness and competence. She served as a midwife for several neighboring families, taught school for a few years when Prescott's teacher left unexpectedly, and was always the first to organize help when someone faced hardship. Jesse served on the town council and helped establish a church in their growing community. They had 2 more children, another son named Patrick and a daughter named Grace. The ranch house rang with laughter and noise, with children's voices and the sounds of daily life. Jesse taught all the children to ride and to respect the land, passing on the skills and values that had served him so well. Eleanor often thought back to that terrifying day in the canyon when the mountain lion had cornered her. If Jesse had not been tracking that cat, if he had arrived even a minute later, her entire life would have been different. She would not have married the man she loved, would not have built this beautiful life, would not have brought these wonderful children into the world. It seemed impossible that so much happiness could have stemmed from such a moment of terror, but she was grateful beyond words that fate had brought Jesse Morrison into her life. One evening in the summer of 1895, Eleanor and Jesse sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were grown now. With Tommy preparing to take over the main ranch operations, Sarah married to a good man from Prescott, Patrick, working as a deputy sheriff, and Grace away at a teaching college in Flagstaff. "Do you ever regret it?" Jesse asked, reaching over to take Eleanor's hand. "Marrying a cowboy and spending your life on a ranch in the middle of nowhere?" Eleanor squeezed his hand, looking at the strong, weathered profile of the man she had loved for 17 years. His hair was touched with gray now, and lines crinkled the corners of his eyes, but to her he was still the same handsome cowboy who had fired his rifle and saved her life. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "You gave me everything I ever wanted, a home, a family, a purpose, and most importantly, love. Real, true, lasting love." Jesse turned to her, his dark eyes soft. I am the one who was blessed. That day I found you in the canyon, I thought I was just tracking a mountain lion. I had no idea I was actually tracking my future, my whole life. You made me into the man I always wanted to be, Eleanor. You gave me a reason to work hard, to build something lasting, to be better than I thought I could be. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of sage and leather that always clung to him. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and the evening star appeared in the deepening blue sky. The land that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving had become home, had given them everything that mattered. Tell me again about the day we met, Eleanor said, even though she had heard the story 100 times and told it herself just as often. Jesse smiled and wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Well, I was tracking the biggest mountain lion I had ever seen, following its prints through those red rock canyons east of Prescott. It was April of 1878, and the wildflowers were blooming like I had never seen before. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened to her husband's deep voice, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, and thanked God for mountain lions, for canyons, for cowboys with quick reflexes and kind hearts, and for the beautiful, unexpected ways that love could change everything,